The sky over Aaron 9 was a shade of violet rarely seen by human eyes. The clouds moved like slow dancers, painted in dark bruises of smoke and flame. Below them, the battlefield smoldered, dotted with broken machines, shattered armor, and the dying silence of things that once screamed. Sergeant Callan Drew trudged through the wreckage, his breathing shallow behind a cracked respirator. The war had ended hours ago, not with a bang, but with the static hum of retreating enemy signals and the eerie quiet of death settling in. The humans had survived, barely. But the cost was written in metal and blood across the plains of a world they never asked to save. Callan didn't care for medals or flags anymore. He was tired, his soul worn thin from carrying too many bodies and bearing too many faces he once knew. Yet something pulled him forward, something strange, something. Not human. He heard it before he saw it. A sound too soft to be mechanical, too weak to be threatening. It was a whimper, raw and ragged, like the sound a child might make while hiding from a monster. Callan's boots crunched over broken glass and alien bone as he approached a collapsed structure, its pillars scorched and melted. Tucked beneath a piece of metal plating, half covered in ash, was a figure. Small, delicate, not human. Her skin shimmered faintly, like starlight trying to breathe. Her hair, if it could be called that, was a cascade of translucent filaments, tangled and dirty. Her eyes, God, those eyes were too big for her thin face, glowing faintly blue even. As they welled with fear and exhaustion, she wasn't dead. Not yet, but she was close. Callan dropped to his knees beside her. He didn't recognize the species, but he saw the pain, the cracked ribs, the bruises that bloomed across her chest like violet ink. She had tried to crawl away, dragging one leg behind her. A trail of blood marked her path, a different color, almost silver. She stared at him like he might finish her off, like all she knew of humans was fire and steel. But Callan didn't raise a weapon. He lowered his helmet. She could see his face. A man, weathered and scarred, with tired eyes and lips pressed into a line that had forgotten how to smile. Slowly, carefully, he reached for her. She flinched at first. Her hands, barely larger than a child's, curled against her chest. But her strength was gone, and when he slid his arms beneath her fragile body, she didn't resist. She only let out a weak cry, a sound that broke something inside him. She weighed almost nothing. Her breathing came in short, sharp stutters. Every step he took away from the ruins felt like a prayer. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know if she was friend or foe. He only knew that no one deserved to die like that, alone and broken beneath a world that had forgotten mercy. As he carried her back to the medical pod, the wind whispered across the field, tugging at his coat, rattling the bones of the fallen. Callan didn't hear it. All he heard was her breathing. All he saw were her eyes blue like frozen oceans, watching him with a mixture of terror and something else. Hope, maybe, or maybe just disbelief that a human would carry her instead of kill her. In that moment, it didn't matter. He had saved lives before. Human lives, comrades, civilians. But this was different. This wasn't duty. This wasn't orders. This was something else entirely. By the time he reached the med station, alarms were already offline, and the auto dock unit flickered uncertainly. He laid her down on the table, hands shaking slightly as he activated the scanner. The machine beeped, confused by her physiology but trying its best to keep her alive. Callan pulled off his gloves, blood hers and his own streaking across his palms. He leaned over her, brushing dirt away from her temple. She blinked up at him, lips moving but no sound coming out. He didn't understand her language. But he didn't need to. Her eyes said enough. She was scared. She was hurt, and she was his responsibility now. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But he knew, deep in his bones, that something had shifted the moment he lifted her. From that rebel, not just the direction of his day, not just the outcome of a mission, something greater. A thread had been pulled. A path had begun. And at the center of it all was a wounded alien girl, and the human who chose to save her, even if it changed everything. Asterisk, the med bay flickered with failing power, casting dim shadows over the alien girl's frail body. The emergency lights pulse red, like a heartbeat slowly losing rhythm. Callan stood by her side, arms crossed, boots rooted to the floor like he was afraid if he moved, she might vanish. He wasn't a medic, not really. He'd patched up soldiers. On the front lines, stuffed gauze into wounds and closed gashes with shaking fingers, but this was different. Her anatomy didn't match anything in the Allied Species database. 2 hearts, a spinal column that branched like roots. Lungs that fluttered like paper in wind. She wasn't made to survive war. And yet here she was, clinging to life in the most human way possible, with stubbornness and silent screams. Callan stared at the vitals the machine was trying to interpret. Every rating blinked with warnings, symbols he didn't understand. But one number, the pulsing one, was all he focused on. It dipped dangerously low, then climbed back up, like a signal fighting to be heard. He should have called someone. He should have signaled command, told them he found an unidentified Xeno survivor. That was the protocol. Instead, he kept quiet. If they found out, they'd take her, for study, for questions. Maybe worse. They wouldn't see what he saw, the tremble in her fingers, the way her mouth twitched in pain, the silent plea in her eyes. They'd see a specimen, a threat, something that didn't belong, but Callan had seen too much death to let this be another. He moved quietly, fetching the old field med kit he kept in a locker for emergencies. Most of the contents weren't compatible with alien biology, but he could at least clean the wounds, stop the bleeding. He washed his hands, not just out of habit, but out of reverence. There was something sacred about what he was doing. Not saving a life, not just that. Choosing to care, to break the cycle, to answer pain with gentleness, even when the world around him had forgotten how. She stirred as he cleaned a gash along her ribs. Her body tensed, but she didn't fight. Her eyes fluttered open, blinking against the dim light. He noticed the strange rings within her irises like galaxies spinning in silence. Her lips parted, and she let out a sound. Soft, shaky, not words. Just a sound, but Callan responded. "It's all right," he whispered, voice low and steady. "You're safe now. I won't let them hurt you." She didn't understand him. He knew that. But still she calmed. Maybe it was his tone. Maybe it was the way he moved, slow, careful, as if he were holding the weight of a life more precious than any weapon. He wrapped her injuries in clean gauze, cradled her broken leg in splints made from scavenged metal and cloth. When she coughed, he held a mask to her face and watched the way her chest struggled to rise. Every moment stretched into eternity. Time felt slower with her, heavier, as if the universe had paused to see what he would do next. And in those long moments, something inside him began to thaw, not all at once, but piece by piece. A man who had once buried his own daughter back on Earth, long before he joined the war. A man who had stopped believing in second chances and innocence. And yet, here was this creature, this alien girl, looking at him not like a soldier, not like a killer, but like something softer. Like a promise he didn't know he had made. He brought her water, though she barely drank. He tried to offer her nutrient paste, but she turned away. Her skin was cooler now, her body trembling less. When she slept, he stayed nearby. Not out of duty, not out of fear she'd flee, but because he couldn't leave her alone. Not after what he saw, not after what he felt. When she woke again, her eyes lingered on him longer. No longer with just fear, but with curiosity. And something he hadn't expected to trust. That he didn't know how long they sat like that. A human and an alien. Two strangers linked by violence. Stitched together by something far more fragile than peace treaties or science. Kindness. That was all. But sometimes that was enough. The storm outside had calmed. Smoke still hung in the air, but the fires had stopped. The war for now was over. But something else had begun. Callan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You don't have to speak," he said gently, knowing she wouldn't understand. "Just rest. I'll stay right here." And as her eyes finally drifted closed, as her breathing settled into a quieter rhythm, he realized something terrifying and beautiful all at once. He had saved her, but somehow she was saving him too. Callan woke to the soft hum of dawn filtering through the shattered viewport, the sky now stained a pale peach instead of the angry violet of yesterday, and for a breath he forgot where he was until a fragile sigh reminded him. The alien girl lay beside him on the med cot, eyes half open, watching the changing light as if it were the first sunrise she had ever seen. He rubbed sleep from his face, suddenly self-conscious of the stubble on his jaw and the dried streaks of soot on his cheeks. But when her gaze shifted to meet his, he saw neither fear nor revulsion, only a shy recognition that felt warmer than the rising sun. He offered her water again, this time tilting the cup until a thin stream met her lips. And she drank hesitant at first, then gratefully, droplets shining like liquid crystals across her chin. Her voice emerged as a thread of music, syllables. Light and quick, but beyond his grasp. Still, instinct urged him to respond, so he touched his chest and spoke, "Callan." She repeated the gesture, pressing slender fingers to her sternum, and uttered a hushed tone that sounded like Leora. The name fluttered between them, delicate yet impossible to forget, and in speaking it, he felt the floor steady beneath his feet as if some unseen anchor had found purchase. He pulled an old hollow locket from his breast pocket, its casing dented, its projection glitchy, and activated it. The flicker of a laughing human child spun above his palm bright-eyed, dark-haired, forever 7 years old. Callan's throat tightened, the memory pricking like a thorn, but he let the image linger because Leora's pupils widened in wonder, small breaths catching as she reached out, her fingers passing through the ghostly light. He told her, voice cracking, that the girl had been his daughter, lost to fever before the war ever called him away. She could not parse his words, yet tears pooled in her luminous eyes as though translating sorrow needed no shared language. A faint tremor rattled the walls, the distant boom of ordnance disposal teams. Clearing unexploded shells and reflex gripped Callan's muscles, but Leora flinched harder, a whimper escaping. Without thinking, he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close until her two hearts drummed against his side. And in that hush he whispered promises he barely believed, that the fighting was finished here, that she would not be abandoned. Again, hours passed. He scavenged a translator module from a ruined scout drone and wired it into the medbay console, praying the algorithms could catch fragments of her speech. When Leora next tried to speak, the device stuttered, then produced a warbling interpretation. Hunt, night beasts. Mother gone, home shattered. Her lips quivered, and Callan realized her world had burned the same day his battalion. Landed collateral in a campaign she never chose. Guilt speared him, but she rested a trembling hand over his. And the translator offered a simpler phrase, almost pleading, "No alone." He nodded, voice thick. "No, you're not alone." In that moment, the lights flickered out. Emergency power was failing, life support systems shutting down one by one. Callan cursed softly, scrambling to patch the coolant lines while the air stagnated. Yet Leora, weak as she was, slid from the cot and steadied him, her fingertips glowing. Faintly, bioluminescent patterns pulsing across her skin like living circuitry. Where she touched the ruptured conduit, the metal cooled, the hiss of steam fading. The translator, half-functional, offered 2 clipped words: shared strength. Callan stared, stunned, as she swayed and nearly collapsed, her gift costing. Energy she could not spare, so he caught her, lifting her back into his arms. "You save me, I save you," he murmured, and she managed a fragile smile, eyes shimmering with unshed stars. Outside, evac shuttles were launching. His unit was scheduled to depart within the day, yet command had ordered that non-human survivors be turned over to Central Science Corps. Callan's gut nodded, he pictured, Leora strapped to a cold table, while analysts poked, prodded, dissected what made her glow. He could not let that happen. But the decision weighed like iron: defy orders, risk court-martial, or surrender the one being who had rekindled a spark in his hollow chest. As the sun climbed higher and the shadows shortened, Callan realized choice was an illusion. His path had already been chosen the moment he lifted her from the rubble. Hearts 2 alien, 1 human now beat to a single rhythm. He whispered across the quiet room, "We leave together tonight." And though the translator crackled into static, Leora's slow, relieved exhale told him she understood. In that shared silence, amid failing lights and distant thunder, their bond set like forged steel, and the universe outside their fragile haven suddenly seemed both smaller and more dangerous than ever before. The sun had sunk below a cratered ridge of the horizon, casting the sky into a bruised blend of indigo and ash, and in the silence between the stars, Callan prepared for betrayal, not of his unit, but of the orders he had once vowed to obey. He moved through the old outpost like a ghost, gathering supplies with practiced hands, silent as memory. A cloak, thermopack, emergency rations, oxygen filters. He packed them all for 2, even though Leora could barely walk. He had found her. A pair of soft boots meant for human children, and she wore them without protest, even as her limp made her sway like a reed in wind. Each time she stumbled, he steadied her without a word, his fingers warm against her trembling frame. But beneath her quiet eyes, something stirred more than fear, deeper than gratitude. It was the look of someone who had lost everything and still dared to believe in something again. But just as they neared the edge of the camp, a voice cracked through the comms gruff, clipped, unmistakable. "Sergeant Drew, report to sector 4 immediately, debriefing in 10. It was Captain Harker. His voice didn't ask. It commanded. Callan froze. His palm tightened on Leora's hand, and for a moment, the cold returned to his chest. He could lie, say nothing, escape into the wastelands with her under the cover of night, but a patrol would find their trail. Drones would pick up their signal. No, if he left now, they'd both be hunted. He couldn't just run. "Not yet. I'll come back," he whispered to her, lowering her into the shade of a collapsed supply trailer. "Stay here. Don't move. No matter what happens." Her luminous fingers caught his sleeve, the translation device catching faint echoes. "Danger, trap, not safe." He nodded grimly. "I know." Then, pressing her palm gently to his chest, where his daughter's locket still rested, he added, "But I'm not letting them take you, ever." He made his way to Sector 4, boots crunching over ash, mind racing. The debrief room was half ruined, its roof torn open like a peeled fruit, moonlight casting sharp shadows across the walls. Captain Harker stood waiting, arms crossed, datapad in hand. 2 lieutenants flanked him. Their eyes were hard, unreadable. "You've been off comms, Drew," Harker said without looking up. "And your life sign monitor pinned some unusual proximity readings. You care to explain?" Callan said nothing. Harker's eyes narrowed. We picked up faint biosigns, not human and not hostile. Which is odd, considering every other alien within 100 clicks is either dead or gone. So I'll ask again, what the hell did you find out there? Callan clenched his jaw. Nothing hostile. Nothing that needed killing. Don't play games, Harker snapped. This isn't about compassion. It's about containment. If there's a survivor, Central wants it, that's protocol. Callan's heart thudded like a war drum. He could almost feel Leora's fingers still clinging to his coat. He imagined her waiting, crouched in the cold, eyes darting at every distant footstep. He took a breath. She's just a girl, he said quietly. Alone, hurt, barely alive. The silence that followed was colder than space. A girl? One of the lieutenants echoed. You mean an alien? Callan nodded once. Her name is Leora. Harker's face twisted, more in disbelief than rage. You gave it a name? I didn't give her anything. She told me. You disobeyed orders, Harker growled. You interfered with a specimen of potential strategic value. You compromised the chain of command. Callan stepped forward, shadows clinging to his face. I saved a life. That's not a compromise, that's a choice. Harker motioned to the lieutenants. Bring her in now. And just like that, instinct shattered the chains of protocol. Callan's hand moved faster than thought, drawing the stun blade from his belt in one motion. The arc of light flashed once, humming low. You'll have to go through me. The lieutenants paused, uncertain. They knew Callan's record 13 campaigns, decorated twice for valor, feared even among veterans. Harker's nostrils flared. She's not one of us, Drew. She's not even from our system. She's not a weapon, Callan hissed. She's a child, one who's seen more war than any of us. Then let her be studied. Let her pain mean something. Callan shook his head. Her pain already means something. It means we're not monsters. They stared at one another, breath taut, silence thick, and then the alarm blared high and sharp. An outer perimeter drone had gone offline. Callan's blood turned to ice. If the scouts had circled back, if anyone had stumbled upon the trailer, he ran, faster than thought. Out the door, through the ash, into the dark. He called her name. Leora, Leora. The night swallowed his voice. When he found her, she was gone, but the silver blood trail glistened like a fragile thread leading toward the trees. She had fled. Not from him, but for him to protect the only human who had protected her. And as Callan followed the trail, every heartbeat screamed the same truth. Asterisk. He wasn't just trying to save her anymore. He needed her to save him too. Asterisk. The trees were not like Earth's trees. These were tall, skeletal things, their trunks black as obsidian, their branches webbed in threads of bioluminescent moss that glowed a sickly green. The deeper Callan went, the more the silence pressed in on him like a held breath. The forest of Aranine was a place the soldiers had avoided, something about strange readings, interference, drones that vanished without explanation. But now, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the fading trail of Leora's blood, and the faint echoes of her uneven steps imprinted in the soft, ash-laced soil. He followed her like a man, drowning followed air, each moment stretching into fear. What if he was too late? What if Harker's men had gotten to her first? What if she believed he had betrayed her, like everyone else had before? A branch snapped ahead. Callan froze. Then a whimper thin and breathless followed by a low, guttural growl. He broke into a sprint, tearing through the underbrush until he reached a clearing, bathed in the unnatural light of the moss above. And there, at the center, Leora knelt beside a tree, cradling her injured side, trembling as something circled her. It wasn't human. It wasn't even mechanical. It was one of the things the scientists had whispered about, a leftover from the planet's early bioengineering wars. A predator built to guard ruins long forgotten. A beast taller than a man, with armored limbs and eyes that glowed red like twin coals. Its body moved like liquid metal and bone, all silent speed and clawed precision. Leora didn't cry out. She only curled around herself, glowing faintly, as if hoping the creature would overlook her. But it wouldn't. It had already scented blood. And then Callan stepped into the clearing. He didn't shout, didn't fire his weapon. He just walked forward slowly, hands raised, gaze locked on the creature. It turned toward him, and for the first time, Callan saw the machine beast hesitate. His heart thundered, but his voice came out calm. "You don't want her," he said, not knowing if the thing could even hear. "You want me?" The creature lowered its head. Muscles rippled beneath its skin of plated chitin. Callan knew he wasn't fast enough to draw and fire. So he didn't try. He dropped his weapon. The blade clattered against the roots. He took another step forward. Then another dot behind him. Leora whispered something, just one word, but it felt like it cracked the world. The translator picked it up in pieces. "No, not." "Leave?" Callan smiled, eyes still locked on the predator. "I'm not leaving you, ever." The beast lunged out and time shattered. He didn't remember the impact. Only pain, the searing agony as claws raked across his chest, the sound of bone cracking. He fell hard, his body rolling through dirt and moss, blood pouring from his side. Somewhere distantly, he heard Leora scream, not just in fear, but in rage. Her voice changed, deepened. A ripple of energy burst from her body like a shockwave, throwing the creature back with a screech. Her hands glowed blindingly bright now, etched with fractal lines that pulsed like circuits alive with grief. She rose, staggered toward him, Dot fell beside him. Hands pressed to his wounds. She cried silver tears this time, hot as acid. Her voice trembled, broken, pleading. The translator flickered alive again. "No. Not you. You stayed. You stayed." Callan coughed blood, his vision blurred. But he reached for her face, brushed a trembling thumb along her cheek. "You're safe," he rasped. "No," she said, more clearly now. "We're safe, together," and then something impossible happened. The glow from her palms seeped into his wounds, not as heat, not as fire, but as memory visions flooded him, her people, her mother, the attack. The night she fled the burning city beneath 2 moons. Her childhood laughter echoing across fields of silver grass. The moment she saw him through the rubble, broken but not cruel. Every piece of her soul spilled into him like a gift freely given, and the pain ebbed out his skin mended, the bleeding slowed. He gasped alive. Somehow impossibly alive. Leora slumped against him, drained beyond words. But smiling, Callan held her close, now fully aware of what had happened. She hadn't just healed him. She had bonded with him, some ancient rite from her people, meant to be shared only once in a lifetime. A link deeper than blood, a soul tether. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't ritual. It was something more sacred, Dot. It was love. Not the kind between lovers, but the kind between those who choose each other over and over, even in fire, even in death. Callan whispered, "You didn't have to do that." She looked up, blinking slowly, the last of her strength flickering in her gaze. "You would have." And she was right, Dot, because in saving her, he had found something he never thought he'd feel again, not just purpose, but the raw, fragile truth that maybe, just maybe, the war hadn't stolen everything after all. Asterisk, the wind carried the scent of ozone and ash, swirling through the hollow forest as Callan carried Leora in his arms once again, but this time everything was different. Her head rested against his shoulder, her breath warm and steady, though she was clearly spent. The light beneath her skin had dimmed, flickering low like embers at the edge of dying coals. Yet she clung to him with trust, with faith, as though he were her anchor to a world that had betrayed her too many times before. Callan's own body moved on instinct, still healing, still aching, but no longer broken. Whatever she had done, whatever bond she had shared, it had changed him at the root. He wasn't just carrying her through the forest. He was carrying the final promise he had left to give. Behind him, the creature's body smoldered where it had fallen. Cracked open by a surge of bioluminescent force, Leora could no longer summon. The energy had drained from her, almost like it had transferred into him. He felt stronger, not just physically, but in a way that made him want to live again. To fight not for war, but for her. For whatever future they might steal from the teeth of the galaxy. But the moment of peace was short-lived. From the far edge of the forest, engines roared. Bright floodlights cut through the trees like swords of white fire. A squad of exo-armored troops stomped into view, their visors glowing red beneath the helmet crests of Central Command. They had tracked his signal, traced the heat signature of the encounter. They hadn't come to rescue. They had come to recover. And recovery for beings like Leora always meant one thing: containment. Callan set her down behind a fallen mob and stepped forward with his hands raised. "Stop," he barked, loud enough for the trees to echo his voice. "She's not a threat." The soldiers didn't lower their weapons. The captain at the front raised a scanner. "We've already logged her as an anomaly. Orders are to extract and isolate." "Stand down, Sergeant. She saved me," Callan growled. "She saved this entire sector, which makes her valuable, not yours." The word lit a fire in him. Yours. As if she were an object. As if this girl, this living, breathing miracle, who had trusted him enough to share the core of her being, was just another sample in a lab. Callan stepped closer. "If you want her," he said, voice steady, "you'll have to go through me." They didn't blink dot, and then a flash of recognition lit one of the soldiers' eyes. "He's bonded," the man said into his cum. "Confirmed soul tether detected. This is a full imprint. It's irreversible." The captain hesitated. "Then he's compromised." Callan's stomach twisted. He saw it coming. The way their formation shifted. The flicker of fingers on triggers. "Don't," he said, taking one step back toward Leora. "Don't make me do this." But the captain gave the order. 3 soldiers raised stun rifles, and the forest lit up in blue fire, except none of the blasts hit Callan. In the same moment the weapons discharged, the world screamed. The moss above exploded in blinding light. Roots surged from the ground like serpents. A protective pulse erupted from the ground where Leora sat, unconscious but still glowing faintly. The bond had awakened something older than war, something buried in the veins of the planet itself. It shielded her. It shielded him. The soldiers were thrown back by a force they couldn't explain, their suits shorting out, visors cracking. When the dust settled, Callan stood in the middle of the devastation, untouched, Leora still behind him, curled like a child in sleep. The soldiers groaned and scrambled to recover, but Callan had already lifted her again. No more hesitation. No more waiting for permission. She was his to protect now. Not because she was weak, not because she was different, but because she had chosen him and he had chosen her. He walked through the carnage with the slow confidence of a man who had faced death and been reborn in its fire. And the soldiers, for all their weapons and orders, did not stop him. They watched as he disappeared into the mist, carrying the alien girl who should have been their enemy but had become his reason to live. As the lights faded behind them and the trees swallowed them whole once more, Callan whispered against her temple, "I won't let them take you. I'll go anywhere. I'll give everything. You're not alone anymore." And though she did not wake, her hand closed around the locket hanging from his neck. A gesture, a vow, a heartbeat in the dark, asterisk. The storm came days later, violent and sudden, tearing across the valley where Callan had found shelter for them, beneath the husk of a long-forgotten orbital pod buried in the hills. Rain struck the metal like desperate fingers pounding on a locked door, and lightning danced through the sky in jagged fury, as if the heavens themselves had finally noticed their escape and were trying to call them back. Inside, wrapped in salvaged thermal blankets and the glow of flickering emergency lights, Leora lay still but breathing, her body slowly healing, her heartbeat a rhythm Callan had come to live by. He watched her through the storm, not with worry, but with something far more aching, awe. She had come back to him, again and again, and he, to her dot in those quiet hours when sleep didn't come, Callan talked to her, even if she couldn't always answer. He told her about Earth, not the Earth of generals and orders, but the one of rain on tin rooftops, of laughter through open windows, of a little girl who once sang to the stars. He shared stories of his daughter, not in sorrow, but in celebration, the way she used to draw suns with too many rays, the way she thought every flower was magic. He even admitted how, after she died, he'd stopped believing there was anything left in the universe worth fighting for. Until now, and then, one night, her voice broke the silence, not through the translator. Not in full sentences, but soft, raw sounds filled with meaning. She sings, still, Leora whispered. Callan turned sharply. Her eyes were open, not wide with fear, but calm, reflective. Your small one, her light, with you? He choked on a breath. You saw her? Leora smiled faintly, lifting a hand to rest on his chest where the locket lay. In you. Tears welled in his eyes, not from sadness, but the unbearable beauty of it. She had seen the echo of his love, the piece of him he thought he had lost forever. And somehow, through their bond, she carried it. Time passed differently after that. Leora regained strength. Her wounds closed, her steps steadied. Her voice returned in full, strange syllables wrapped in gentle tones. They spoke more through gestures than words, but every glance between them was layered in meaning. They moved like two halves of something whole, not lovers, not quite family, but bonded in a way few could understand. When Callan's distress beacon finally pinged back, a signal an old frequency from an independent cargo vessel, he hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of certainty. He knew the decision he would make. The ship, old and rusted, but still flying, took them in without question. The crew were nomads, traders with more loyalty to kindness than to any flag. They didn't ask what species Leora was. They didn't ask why a decorated human soldier was traveling with her across the stars. They only asked if the two of them needed a place to be taught, and Callan said yes. Years passed. The war became history, the battles recorded in lifeless lines of text. But far from the echo of conflict, aboard a modest freighter turned home something strange bloomed. Leora's health returned fully, and in time, so did something else new life. It was not something either of them expected, but something their bond had made possible. A child, born not of species, but of connection, of shared sacrifice, of a tether that had bridged the space between hearts that should never have touched. Child had eyes like frozen starlight and a laugh that sounded like wind through leaves. Human and not human. Something new. Something beautiful. Callan held her for the first time with hands that had once only known how to carry rifles. And Leora looked on, tired but glowing, her hand resting in his. You are? Father, she said softly in clear English now, and Callan wept, not from pain, not from fear, but because somehow, after all the wreckage, all the loss, all the empty nights in the trenches of alien worlds, he had been given a second chance. Daughter not of blood, but of choice. He kissed Leora's forehead and whispered, "Thank you for finding me in the dark." Leora closed her eyes, content. You were the light Callan drew. I only followed it. And far beyond the reach of old wars, under stars unscarred by warships, a child was born who would carry the legacy of a soldier's compassion and an alien. Girl's unbreakable heart, not just the survivor, but the future.